Thank you all for coming. It's nice to see you all. Great turnout. Some of you might recall we had both Avery Willis Hoffman here, who is the artistic director of the Brown Arts Institute, and we had Kate Craxton here, who is with us in the corner there, who is the chief curator at the Brown Art Institute and the director of the Bear Gallery and a few other titles, which I'll just abbreviate for a moment. And tonight we have as our guest Ken Kleinman, who is the faculty director of the Brown Arts Institute. So you see we have a sort of double leadership there. And it's just a pleasure to see you here and hear you talk. And he's new at this post we were just talking about. It's like 8 weeks or whatever, 2.5 months. And he's an architect, studied architecture at Berkeley and then taught in Berlin and Vienna, Copenhagen and Zurich. And then he became a professor at the University of Michigan, stayed there for 10 years. And he's obviously a very good teacher. He won several awards, but he also discovered, I think at that moment, that he is a good leader and administrator. And I really admire that greatly. He became chair of architecture at the State University of New York at Buffalo and stayed there for 6 years. Then he became the founding dean of the School of Constructed Environments at the Parsons School of Design, the new school, and was there for a number of years. And then he became dean of the College of Architecture, Art and Planning at Cornell University. So lots of deanships. And then he came to Providence to become provost at the Rhode Island School of Design in 2018. And I must say, I really admire people like my friend Kent here, who have that talent to be an administrator in an academic environment. Academics have a really good life, you know, I can say that, but they also can be quite cantankerous and difficult. And someone, you know, who can manage that and deal with all of that and make a lot of things happen, I greatly admire, and Kent certainly did that. And because, of course, there's the famous saying, the stakes are so small, right, that, you know, but he did a wonderful job and led all these institutions and created a lot of art interventions that happened there. He also is a scholar, has written books on Mies and Art of Loos and Rule of Arnhem, among others, and won a lot of grants from the Mellon Foundation and the Canadian Centre for Architecture and the Graham Foundation and the Brunner Prize. And he was also awarded with one of the 10 Best Books Awards from the Architects Journal. And he received the American Institute of Architects New York State Educator Honor Award in 2012. And he was recognized as a top 25 most admired educators in design, twice actually by Design Intelligence in 2016. There are many more grants and awards that I could mention, but I just want to say that I'm really delighted. Where's my second page? I had somewhere that I'm really delighted. Exactly. That you're here, and I'm just delighted and convinced that our Brown Arts Institute is in very good hands with you, with all your experience. So please help me welcome Ken Kleinman.
Is this recorded, or can I talk about cantankerous faculty? Okay. Okay, it's on. Well, Dietrich, hang on, I gotta get my notes. Thank you, Dietrich. always wonderful to have you introduce me. You make me sound important and my life meaningful. So thank you for that. And thank you all so much for coming out before dinner, before drinks, to hear me chat on a little bit about a job that I've been in since the middle of July. So I actually have very little to say about it, and I don't want to say things that are too speculative, because then they may not come to pass and you won't believe me going forward. So what I've done is I've put some slides together to give you a little bit of context about the Brown Arts Institute, just so you know what it is and how it's built and what its aspirations are. But I don't have material yet from my work there because it's just been too fresh. And then I put some images together that have a kind of red thread of thinking about art making as a form of research. And some speculations about that, and then I've peppered it with concrete examples, in some cases work that I've worked with closely, in many cases just projects that I find enormously inspiring, because I think seeing a concrete example and having a kind of narrative but then a set of examples with it just gives it more substance, and you're able, I think, to more understand the direction that we might be heading in. So let me launch into this, and I would almost say, if this isn't inappropriate for the dignity of this institute under Professor Neumann, just ask a question halfway through, a third way through. If something pops to your mind, just interrupt me, because we're a small group and definitely want to make this casual. So here, in a diagrammatic form, is the Brown Arts Institute. Dietrich already said there are two directors. Interestingly, not all institutes have two directors. Has an artistic director, that's Avery Willis Hoffman, and a faculty director, that's myself, academic side and an artistic side. And what I want to say right from the beginning is those two sides are deeply interlocked. We have agreed from day one that to the degree that we can, we don't want to force it, but to the degree that we can, we never want to have an academic program that isn't taking advantage of the artistic activity institute. And every time we bring an artist in or a performer in, or a theorist in from the artistic side, we want the students and the faculty to benefit from that as well. So wherever possible, we're linking arms, linking events, and overlapping them so that both the academic and the artistic are seen as one and the same kind of enterprise and not as separate enterprises. And that is probably obvious in many fields, but in the arts, it hasn't always been the case that you can bring in a painter or bring in a performer and say that it has a seat at the table at the academy. This has not always been the case. And one of the missions in my academic career has been precisely to argue that you can study the human condition through multiple tools, multiple ways, multiple modalities, one of which is making marks on a canvas, or moving in space, or reading a poem. Those are ways of tackling difficult, complex social problems, just like you can do it with symbolic logic in the sciences or with language in the humanities. So I'm not arguing that the arts are above those modes of asking important questions, but I am arguing that they deserve to be treated as equals, even though the modality is different, of course, and that's a little bit what I want to talk about. So here's the Brown Arts Institute sitting very lonely on a white background. That's because that's not a good representation of. This is a better representation of the way we think about the Brown Arts Institute, which is part of an ecosystem. And the ecosystem is surely incompletely rendered here, but you get a sense that the Institute sits in the center, because I made that slide. But we very much think that the student art groups, of which there are many, more than many, almost 200 or 300, I believe, have definitely a role in the Institute. Some of them are independent, but some of them really could profit from being associated and supported with us. So student art groups are part of that. The art departments, we call them 7 art departments at Brown, very much have a role in the Institute, both in shaping its direction and using its resources and expertise. But they are also independent departments, so I've rendered them to be both in and out of the Institute. Other departments and programs throughout the campus, physics, biomed, computer science, nothing is safe from us. We think that the arts have a role, potentially, in every single discipline, if that discipline is open to that conversation. So I've put them in this ecosystem as well. The external art world, we care deeply about that. Those are our peers. We bring them in, but we also want to let them know what we're up to so they can become kind of ambassadors for Brown Arts. And community partners. We very much see the community, Providence, Rhode Island, the Northeast, as part of our mission, as part of the community that we both invite in to participate, and we want to help and learn from and go out from the Institute and be in the community and do artwork there. So they're very much part of the ecosystem. And then you can see I have the free radicals in here. I don't know exactly what I meant by that. I just knew that there are lots and lots of characters that aren't well described by those bubbles, maybe the ones that you were referring to. And I just wanted to be sure that they're not excluded. So this is probably a better representation of the kind of ambition we have and the way we see our mission. I could not show you this, the Lindemann Performing Arts Center. I'm sure you've seen it in various stages of construction, from a giant hole in the ground to almost finished state that it's in now. The shot on the left is about a week old. That's the main hall, the main performing space. And of course, it's a performing arts center in the traditional sense. It will have an audience, and it will have events, and it will have a schedule, and have tickets, and all those things. I prefer you didn't think of it that way, although it's obviously that. But really want you to think of it as a research instrument. We look at this as an instrument that challenges the way we think about bringing art activity to the community, challenges artists to think differently about the kinds of work that they can do, challenges students and allows students to think outside of a box, to do works that maybe wouldn't be possible without this instrument. So we really do use a little bit the language of the sciences, of a laboratory, and think of this as a research tool. What do I mean by that? Well, quite literally, it is a flexible and very challenging artifact, this building. And if you can, I don't know if you can make it out from back there, but here are 4 variations on the main hall. So in this building, the audience, the gantries that hold the audience along the sides can move. 3 of the 4 walls actually move in and out, and some of the long walls are split in 2, so they can move differentially to form different configurations. And you can see 4 of them there, the kind of orchestral, I don't know if you can make it out from there, but the orchestral setting here, recital hall, more narrow and long, end stage, a kind of proscenium arrangement where the gantries are out towards the stage and then more narrow towards the audience. And then the last one, this experimental mode, which is really a kind of box, a cube of space where all the gantries are brought in, and it's open to kind of experimental stagings and experimental conceptions of performance. It also has some very sophisticated sound system in there, an embryonic sound system where it's a spatial audio array, so you can produce an audio experience that as if you were in a different location. So you can imagine if you're projecting material and changing the audio conditions, you can transport people to different places, almost bodily, everything but bodily. So it really is quite an exciting project. And what you may not be aware of, but I definitely want you to know about this, is a good part of the building is underground. A substantial part of the benefit of this building will not be in that main hall that I just showed you, but will actually be in spaces that are subterranean, very large, and very, very well outfitted. You can see it on the section there. There's 3 large halls, 3 rehearsal and performance halls down here. This is what, these are renderings of the hall on the right. And these will be able to be used by faculty and students on a very fluid basis, ideally just scheduling the space in like you would schedule a classroom. And you can imagine a group of students trying to work out a staging of a particular performance. The orchestra needs to do a rehearsal. A movement studio needs a sprung floor. Some kind of audio event is happening. There's some very sophisticated audio in there. All that can happen in a very fluid way in these 3 very large rooms down below. So my suspicion is that while the main hall is the most visible, these spaces outlined in red in many ways will be the most frequently used by the students and the faculty. So that's on the Lindemann. So let me move now to a different register altogether. And I want to talk a little bit about sort of the how art is made and how art can be seen as a material practice of knowledge production. So this is the proposition that the BAI puts forth, that we're actually adding to the human reservoir of knowledge. And the question is, what does that mean? What kind of practices and how do those practices work? And I cite this one example. There are many examples I could bring you, but I wanted to start with this one example because it's so poignant, and I think some of you have maybe seen this before, but it's so poignant and also not well enough known. It's a Czech refugee named Jan Tarnowski wrote a very beautiful little pamphlet in 1987 called The Projection of a Mauervorsprung. Mauervorsprung is a German term for projecting wall. It's a neologism. It doesn't actually translate. You can't look it up in the dictionary. And it's a story of a little piece of a building that Ludwig Wittgenstein, the philosopher, worked on passionately, intensely for a brief period of his life. And it falls, very interesting, in between two periods. The prior period, he was working with Bertrand Russell. He was working at Trinity at Cambridge and working on a mode of philosophy that was very mathematically informed, the kind of logical construct, formal logical construct with abstract propositions in the tradition of Bertrand Russell. And he published an important book, the Tractatus, in 1922. After he did this building, he wandered and actually didn't produce this book. It was published after he died. But Philosophical Investigations is the kind of summary of the work that he did after this building, 1928. And it's a very different philosophy. It's a philosophy of the idiosyncratic, it's a philosophy of language, it's a philosophy of the empirical use of terminology, completely different from the abstract formal logic of the Tractatus. And in between these two Wittgenstein philosophies, he called himself an architect. He wasn't an architect. He had an architect who worked on this. But he called himself an architect, and he signed the drawings Wittgenstein Architect. And there's his signature. And he was working on this building during that period, and he stumbled upon a conundrum. It's really banal, so please excuse me, but it's really banal. And it was the following. He had this little breakfast room here on the left. You can see it in a line drawing there, and an entry door here. And in the breakfast room, he wanted to place a window, very banal, and he wanted the window centered on the wall. Absolutely simple, right? What could be simpler? He wanted it centered on the wall from the inside and the outside, but that's no big deal, right? You can do that. Should be easy. You can't do it. Or you can't do it easily, or you can't do it logically. Let's put it like that. So here's Tarnowski's drawings, and you can see he's saying it doesn't work because the structural wall is thick, the party wall is thin, so you can't center it from the inside and the outside at the same time. But okay, let's try again. What if the party wall is thick like the exterior wall? Does that work? No, it doesn't work either, you can see, because there's an inside corner and an outside corner. That doesn't work. Yeah, you can do it. Actually, there is a way to do it. But you can only do it if you build two buildings, which is completely illogical, right? So you actually can't do something so dumb as center a window on a wall from the inside and the outside if you have a re-entering corner. Right? And this stunned Ludwig Wittgenstein. He just couldn't fathom that. You know, there must be a shortcoming of the imagination. Somehow I'm not drawing it right. There's got to be a way to do this, right? And so he ends up with this clumsy, crazy design. You see it here. This is the way it was built, with a stub of a thick wall and a niche, trying to sort of suggest that it's centered, but of course it's not. So all you see when you look at the plans is the problem, right? You don't see it centered at all. You just see this stubby little problem statement. And Tarnowski makes the following observation, which I think is quite astute, which is, this isn't a small failure. This isn't a lack of imagination or the fact that he wasn't really a licensed architect. He didn't work on it long enough. It's not a minor failure. This is a massive failure. This is a conceptual failure where the abstract logic of a line drawing or the desire for order hits empirical reality. And the two just don't go together very easily. You can try, but you're going to get lots of kind of illogical friction in it. So for Tarnowski, this is in the category of a giant sort of conundrum of humanity, trying on the one hand to bring order, clarity, purity, linear precision into a world. And then there's the empirical reality of weight and gravity and material practices that have their own imperatives, and they resist that abstraction. And these two things are colliding. And here's the kind of evidence of the output of this thing. So I want to argue that an architect who's used to gravity and thickness and weight would not be so perturbed, because he'd never expect to be able to translate the line drawing into a material condition, right? Now, lots of architects would argue with that statement, but the artistic practice, and architecture I would include inside it, typically deals with material and gravity. It deals with these kinds of empirical conditions. And you can't get at the kind of knowledge you're producing merely through abstraction, merely through talking about it, merely through propositions. Right? You have to engage material. And this is not always true, but I think this is largely true. So let me give you another example. This is William Kentridge. I'm sure you know the South African artist. But you may not know this drawing. This is a line drawing. It's a map of William Kentridge working on a stop-action film. So stop-action film is you have the camera set up, you have a drawing over another position, you make a mark, you take a picture, you go back, you smudge the mark and move it over, you take another picture. If you do that multiple times, you can get the impression of an animated line going across the camera. The camera in this image is in the center, that red square, and the drawing is the rectangular square on the right. Now, stop-action filmmaking is a very precise matter, right? It's kind of linear. You click, you go, you smudge, you go back, click, you smudge, you go back, you click, you smudge. You do that for like days on end, right? So it's the people who make these kind of movies are typically really, really persnickety. Look at the line work on this. Nothing can be further from linearity, right? This is an experience, a tortured experience, full of delays and having to take a rest and sleep and get cold water and walk back and forth. And then there's numbers in there. There's a 1 and a 17 and a 4, but there's no 2 and a 3 and a 6. Illogical number sequence. And you can see what Kentridge is documenting here is, again, something as direct as stop-action filmmaking is actually a kind of different way of thinking about what you're trying to do, what you're trying to say. And the author from whom I got this image, and I'm borrowing this thought, this is Lior Maltz-Lecker, an art historian from RISD, said the following about this drawing, that this is not the path of thought. Many people think that this is, you're drawing, you're materializing thought, right? This is actually the path of not thought, of unthinking. That what's being revealed in art making is the thing that you don't think about, right? It's uncovering conditions, realities, relationships, circumstances that are often hidden from logical thought and fall between logical thought. And this is a kind of the drawing of the unthinkingness of art making that lets you see the world through a different lens. And that, of course, is a very, very profound observation, because that's why the sciences and the humanities and the arts are all needed if we want to understand and come to grips with what it means to be human in the world. So again, I think a very powerful condition of the blindness of rational thought and the opportunity for art to see what's hidden through the kind of consciousness of rational thinking. So I'll give you a concrete example. So this notion that you set up a system, you think you are on a linear path, a logical path. I'm using Albers here. Let's see. Albers said if you put certain kinds of colors and hues next to each other, the context actually affects your perception of those colors. I'm sure you've seen some of his work before. You can see those two small squares appear to be of a different chroma value, but they're not. They're exactly the same. So Albers is saying, context matters. You think you have a logical system of pigment definition, but if you put it in a different context, context matters. But Albers is also saying it matters uniformly, no matter where you are in the world, right? This is an ahistorical kind of context, right? It's not just today and not yesterday. It's not just in the United States and in Europe. It's not just you and not me. Albers is saying context matters, but it's context that's an ahistorical conception. Amanda Williams, whose name you may have caught in the news recently, she just won a MacArthur Fellowship, an artist, trained as an architect, but an artist working out of Chicago, studied Albers in her studies as an architect, and saw something through her art making that Albers missed. I think that's fair to say. So you can see what she's saying here. She built a new palette, again, just colors, but combine that palette with lived experience in the south side of Chicago. And so instead of blue-green and turquoise, right, you get these ultra sheen, pink moisture oil, Hell's Chicken, Currency Exchange, City Boarded Up, Flaming Hots, Newport Squares. What is that? those are colors that are inflected by social conditions, urban conditions, race conditions, cultural conditions, history, location, specificity of who's seeing it, right? Very specific kind of contextualization of colors that in Alba's world was kind of ahistorical. So that's where the colors come from. You've probably seen these products, right? There's kind of commercial dimension to this. And then she took those colors and painted the city, fragments of the city, those colors. Abandoned buildings, Lower East Side of Chicago, painted in the hues that are now inflected through the specificity of space. Right? Again, a material practice, very concrete, very in the moment, very in this particular place, challenging the notion that there's a kind of rational scheme that can explain the way human beings are in the world. Here's another one. Really, really powerful work. So this notion that there's a social context that we cannot ignore, or we ignore at the peril of understanding sort of how these artifacts, these art artifacts are operating in the world, was at the base of a project that I worked on at Cornell in 2011. And I'll give you a brief summary of it. So it was centered on this little vehicle called the Nano. You may have heard about this in 2010-11. There was a lot of news that Tata Motors in India had devised an automobile, and you see a picture of it there, an automobile that was selling for just under $2,500, the price of a laptop at the time. And the project was to provide the Indian population, we're talking 1 billion people, Indian population, with safe automobility, and actually managed to design a car for that amount of money. And through various circumstances, we got our hands on a proto-Nano. The Nano that you see there had no business being in the United States. We imported it as a research specimen. Again, we used the language of science and imported it as a research specimen, and did a project trying to understand not just the technical novelty of this project, which is really amazing, but its entire social context, almost as if it were a social agent itself. So that was the project that we tackled. Just to show you a little bit of the origin of this project, the person who was running Tata Motors at the time, Ratan Tata, said to his team, I want to build a vehicle. I want it to cost 2 lakh rupees, 2,000 rupees, and go design it for me. And they said, well, you can't do that. It's impossible. A scooter costs 1,000 lakh rupees. So what are we talking about? We're talking about 2 scooters, right? So they went out and they bought 2 scooters and they put a little shell in it and they brought it to Ratan Tata. They said, here, this is it. This is the car. And he said, no, not quite. So they went back and they actually did design that thing on the right. We got hold of the scooters, which in my mind are priceless. Did a show, took the car apart, and so we did the kind of technical review of this car. Took every single nut and bolt apart, weighed it, understood its kind of material properties, its functional attributes, and did a series of signage that was a little bit atypical. So here's the show. This is the exhaust, and these little labels you can see here describe the object that was on display from a kind of technical and physical perspective. How much did it weigh? How was it designed? What's it made of? Things like that. Weight was a huge consideration to bring the cost of the car down, so weight became a kind of leitmotif. But also in the show was information, as you see on the top right. And what that is was trying to contextualize what does 2 lakh rupees mean, not to me or to you, but to someone who's living in India and earning rupees, and of, let's say, a security guard. Now, that one's the plate for a security guard, who earns 4.8 lakh rupees, 4,800 rupees. 1 nano would equal 3 used scooters, or so-and-so many bags of rice, or so-and-so many used TVs. So we put the currency in a locally relevant kind of currency, so that you could start to understand, well, just how affordable would the car be to different socioeconomic classes in India. And then we did some ethnography work, and I want you to maybe hold your ears. This might be a little loud, but we did the ethnography of a kilometer. And remember, we're interested in objects being social agents, so why not distance? So this is the ethnography of a kilometer through different modes of preambulation. So by foot, by cart, by auto rickshaw, and by rail. So this is by foot, by cart, auto rickshaw, train. And if you watch the whole kilometer, you'll see different kind of social lived realities depending on your transportation mode. And now, nano. So you probably don't need to say anymore, right? There's total transformation of the social life of an urban condition through the agency of an automobile. We also wanted to know, what would it mean if 1 billion people are driving fossil fuel powered vehicle? Not trivial, even though it was a very small car. So we designed a kind of external poster for the show. This is a giant yellow sphere. It's not a disc, it's a sphere. And it holds the volume of 1 year of CO2 from a nano car. So that is sized to be the volume of the CO2 that the car would output in a year. And it's sitting, and I.M. Pei designed this building, and I'm sure he would be turning in his grave, but it's sitting in a very beautiful exterior space, which just so happens to be very close to the volume of a Ford 150 truck. So here you have the nano and its output, and a Ford truck and its output. Of course, being an academic event, we had a symposium. That's Ratan Tata. You're going to make him out in the middle there. And a very interesting sociologist called Arjun Appadurai, who wrote a book in the mid-'80s called The Social Life of Things. And he gave a wonderful talk to the Cornell community on this, published a book, and I just pulled out a quote for you so you can kind of get the sense of this. In its capacity to make demands rather than fulfill needs, the nano behaves less like a simple commodity and more like a social agent. Right? So these are now designed objects entering the bloodstream of human society and making demands on that society, not just fulfilling a need, but actually making demands and potentially transforming the entire experience of what it means to move through the Indian countryside. I should do a coda here. The nano failed through strange circumstances. Another lecture, another time. But the nano that we had as a research specimen, we had to crush it and send pictures of it crushed to the Department of Transportation in Washington to prove that it wasn't driving around on the streets somewhere. Although we did send one to MIT, and they extended its research life. So that's the nano story. And then I want to end with this slide on this particular chapter. None of this work could be done just by car designers, just by ethnographers, just by economists, just by curators. We needed all these disciplines to work with one another and exchange ideas in a fluid and collaborative way to try to get at the fullness of the impact of a designed object like that. And you can see why a university is such a fantastic setting for doing this kind of work, because where else would you find that expertise all on one campus? And I have to say, Brown is just itching for a project, I think, of this kind of complexity. And the world has many of them because Brown has such deep expertise in all these areas and many more. So let me move on to another one. Dietrich, am I going too long? I'll zip through. I cannot not talk about climate change, and so I will. And the thing in parentheses there is just to say, I believe, maybe you do as well, that we can now talk about whether not as a natural condition, but as a human condition, as a designed condition. And weather is kind of like the nano. It's a designed artifact at this point. We bear that much responsibility for its characteristics. And I want to show you just, there are many, many, many studies. I'm sure you have your favorite. This one I find very compelling and a little disturbing. This 2020, a group of scientists led by a scientist in Nanjing University produced a study called The Future of the Human Climate Niche. And a very elegant hypothesis here. For 6,000 years, human beings have essentially occupied the same part of the world. And you can define that in many ways, one of which is temperature. By and large, for the last 6,000 years, exceptions notwithstanding, human beings have occupied territory that is between 11 and 15 degrees centigrade. And you can find most settlements in that band. And what these scholars did is they took the best available climate models, projected what that might look like in 2070, so let's say 50 years from now, and looked to see what happens to the band. Right? If that's the band where people settle, what happens to the band? And of course, you can imagine what happened to the band. It moved. Right? The band moved, and it actually moves northward. And then the question is, well, what happened to the people who were living for 6,000 years and had settled in the climate niche? And the scholars don't have an answer for that definitively, but it's not difficult to imagine is that there's going to be a lot of migration, because now you are living in a climatically habitable and sustainable and comfortable zone, and that zone is now, in many cases, moved to 30 degrees centigrade. It was 15, now it's moved to 30. So anywhere from 1 billion to 3.5 billion people will be affected by that shift. Will they all move? No. Lots of factors affecting migration, but up to 3.5 billion people will now be confronted with a different climatic home. I wanted to show you this drawing because I think it's pretty hard to read that from this. I don't know if you can do that. But they also produced this drawing, and this also goes to this topic of data visualization. Like sometimes the way you project something and draw something really matters to its legibility. So this is a map showing where things get less sustainable, right? less habitable. And everything that's in the darker red are those places that are experiencing the greatest shifts in the climate niche, right? The largest shift in their temperature. And again, you can see from the map, you can just scan over Venezuela, Brazil, all the sub-Saharan, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Chad, Sudan, all those countries, most of Pakistan, parts of India, a little bit of north of Australia. Those are all bright red. Right? And the greener parts show it's gotten more sustainable. And those are sort of in Canada, parts of Europe, parts of Russia, parts of Mongolia. So the location of the population in the next 50 years is likely to shift. To what magnitude is hard to say, likely to shift. And the poorer countries on the globe tend to be the ones that are less able to mitigate those impacts. And you can see how many poor countries are affected by this shift. So my statement is a little blunt, but my statement is climate justice is social justice. These are not different things, right? Environmental justice and social justice are connected, deeply, deeply connected through data such as this. And artists are aware of this, and artists are starting to do work that tries to get at this very same issue, but not through data science, but rather through the makings of work of arts that allow you to project and speculate, maybe even experience the kind of futures that we might be facing. Oliver Eliasson, one of the better known ones, you might have even read about this project in the Tate Modern, in that big turbine hall in 2003, where he produced a kind of man-made climate, if you will, an artificial sun, haze that surrounded people, a certain kind of light, a monofilament light that produced sort of reds, yellows, and blacks. So the lighting quality was quite distinct. And you can see the experience, you can imagine at least the experience of moving into the space and again, bodily experiencing a different kind of Umwelt, a different kind of environment that may very well be a harbinger of things to come. So this is a very large-scale project. Some very interesting artists doing small projects, very, very small projects, and very ephemeral projects. You may not have heard of Bernard Schmilde. He's from Holland, where they have a lot of clouds. And his métier is clouds. He works in clouds. He makes clouds. He goes around the world and makes clouds. And they have a lifespan of about 3 or 4 seconds. So they don't live long. They have short lifespans, and then they rain themselves to death. So this is a little rain puddle there. And we had him come, and he built a cloud with some students. So students got involved. Temperature, humidity, wind, all those things have to be controlled to produce a man-made environment where you can build a cloud that then dies. Pretty poignant work, even though it's at the time frame of just a few seconds. And, closer to home, Boston. So firms now, not just university, but architecture firms, design engineering firms are starting to open up research offices to try to communicate to populations the consequences of climate change. This is Boston. So many of you might know this well. Sea level at 2050, and then a storm in the same year, and then sea level in 2100, storm in the same year. and you can see that everything that's blue is now submerged, right? It's underwater. But what was really interesting about their work is they weren't just satisfied to do the graphs. They brought it to places like pubs and game rooms and dorms, and it was an interactive game-like interface where you could enter in where you're standing or enter in where you grew up and see whether your house is going to be above or below water in 2050, 2100. And then this kind of work has also been done by students. These are visiting slides, but many, many institutions are having students work on this kind of speculative futures. Like what is it going to look like? Can we speculate with the science that we have what it's going to look like when the water rises? And how do you start to think about the built environment reacting to that condition? You can build a seawall and pretend to keep it out. It's a big, big seawall. Or you can design environments like this particular scheme where it's actually resilient, and as the water comes in, you simply have different portions of dryness and wetness, and you program accordingly. So how you move, what you do, where you put program is built in a kind of resilient way, so as the water rises, programs will shift and movement will shift with it. And I wanted to show you this slide because with technology and immersive technology now, you can bring these projects to the communities. You know, they don't have to come to the studio, because who really comes to a studio? You can go out to the community and say, put on a set of goggles, and I'm going to show you. You're standing right here. I'm going to show you what this is going to look like in 50 or 20 or 30 years. Very powerful. I don't know if you've done any kind of Oculus experience, but very, very powerful. To be standing in an immersive environment. And again, you can imagine, now we have the Lindemann, we have that cube. You could imagine making immersive environments that have this kind of social agenda buried in them. So interesting work. Last few slides. Some artists are working on exactly these topics in very delicate, very small, very powerful ways. And I just wanted to end with a work by Rachel Berwick, who's a glass artist. You're looking at a project called Indigo Scroll. This is a close-up of it. These are indigo buntings, the birds, the songbirds. And she was captivated by the fact that even in death, they retain their color. Their wings have a kind of structural, nanoscale structural composition that refracts the light. So even when they die, it's not organic, it's actually structural light. So they retain their blue quality as a kind of memento to that which we are losing. You know, really powerful work. And she takes the casts of songbirds, dead songbirds, casts them and slumps glass over them. This work is called Fallout. I don't know if any bird people in the audience here. Fallout is when songbirds are migrating. If there's a severe weather event, it's very unusual, but if there's a severe weather event, they will all drop out of the sky at the same time. They'll drop out of the sky. They're not dead. They'll just drop out of the sky and go to the earth where it's safe. And she called this work based on songbirds with slumped glass over it, Fallout. Thank you.
What was the reason that the Department of Transportation was so paranoid about the nano? Was it ridiculous, or was it justified?
No, it was not certified in the United States. It
wouldn't pass safety.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Exactly. So we couldn't bring it in as a car, so we brought it in as a specimen. Yeah. And crushing it was not easy. Actually, I have a piece in my house still.
Yeah, it's like all the electric cars were taken back in California. Yeah. If it doesn't fit what you think it should do, it ain't there.
Yeah. Yeah, just fire away.
What happened to the nano? Did it flourish, or?
It's unclear. It's clearly not a success. So they've stopped making it, although they are thinking of reviving the tool and die. That's all the money is in the tool and die, and building an electric version of it. So that's in the works now. So it may have an afterlife. There were a series of fires. Nanos driving around, and all of a sudden there was combustion. And depending on whose version you believe, it was industrial espionage, or it was a fire caused by the design of the engine. The car was quite threatening to many other automakers because it was very comfortable, extremely safe, and cheap. So again, it's, I'm not in the conspiracy world, but there are stories of people finding benzene wadded fabric in the exhaust pipes that would burn when it was turned on.
Was it built to last or
Yeah.
be more disposable?
No. It was an extraordinary piece of engineering. Really, we got a very close look at the factory in Pune. Extraordinary piece of engineering. They didn't leave anything untouched. Every nut, every bolt, every 4 doors, operable windows, seat belts, small engine, 800 cc, but horn, bumpers, the works. Runs on gasoline. Yeah.
I worked on a lot of sea level rise sustainability things from a science side, and I really like those the goggles and things. Do you still do that, or is there a way to, like, my science colleagues could get in touch with you and try to do something together?
Please, science colleagues, get in touch. Very much so. This is a project that has, it's a visiting project, but it has iterations and there's variations, and happy to talk to you about it.
Okay, good.
I'd love to work with you.
You know, Brown plans to shift the demographics of its student population to meet the new center.
The new Performing Arts Center?
Yeah.
I can't answer that. I would like to speculate that we could start to attract a different kind of student to Brown that is interested in asking difficult questions with these kinds of tools. And whether that means growth or simply a different way of looking at the admissions process. It's a little bit speculative, but it would be very beautiful to make the Brown education available to students that are working on problems with artistic tools.
I have a question about the performing center, about the way in which the cube is going to work. Like the display that you showed us, which was like the most innovative. Are these 4 walls or 6 walls that are expanding and contracting, or is it a fixed cube in the space?
Kate, chime in if I get this wrong, because you've been working on the project. But here's the way it works: is the gantries where the audiences are hanging, and they move in and out like this. And so to make the cube, you move them in, you move the 3rd wall in, so now you got a cube in plan, and you lower the ceiling, so you have a cube in the vertical dimension. I don't think you can stop the walls arbitrarily at any point. They have, because of egress paths and so forth, so that they're fixed. But even the fact that pretty
yeah.
I think adding that they're glass, that a lot of the walls are glass, and that curtains are going to be used. So that makes it even more flexible in the use of space.
And screens on all 4, right? Eventually, all 4 walls. Yeah.
I think so.
I think so.
And then a wall of
Yeah.
glass and.
Yeah. And then the sound system should not be underestimated. If you haven't been in a spatial audio experience, it's staggering. If you put on goggles and you're in a spatial audio experience, you think you're in a rainforest. The only thing is the smell. And once they get the olfactory part down, you're there.
Yeah, I think what interests me from, as it were, an architectural standpoint, and the typology of buildings. I can remember art labs in the 60s, and we were never sure how to do it. You know, and the idea of movable walls. Well, how do you do that? And we're now getting there. But it seems to me, if I look back at the art labs of the 60s, they're gone now. And so this building that you have created, or someone has, that you were in charge of, as it were.
I inherited it.
Yeah, no, exactly. I'm saying that it's, architecture is meant to be something solid that you can touch, and it's going to be there for a while. That's the old definition. Your new definition is, this is like a sponge or blancmange that's always moving, always changing. It's a totally different way to look at life.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, it's a different. And there is another model which we're also interested in is the kind of rough space, sharp space where no elegance at all, but you can drill into the floor. So you kind of need both of those.
Because I think the List building, you know, Dietrich's building, that was originally almost an art lab, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and look at that, that's solid and concrete, you know, where you're proposing something that's also solid but changes and moves.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, what, 50 years, 60 years?
Yeah, 71 was the opening,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Give us a little time and you'll be able to experience it yourself.
Yeah.
So before, I think it looks like there are no more questions, but of course that only means that we will, before I think our speaker move the conversation into the next room over wine and food, as we always do, and we can ask many more questions to Kent. I want to say I thought it was an amazing talk, wonderful to see the power of art and architecture to actually make us see things and solutions that we didn't see before. And of course, Kent's amazing ability to bring us all together behind this wonderful purpose, and to look forward to what you're going to do with the Lindemann Center and the Brown Art Institute. So,
Well, I just thought of a
yes.
question.
Questions
What
come.
are,
Perfect.
what are some of the programs that are specifically planned for the space? Have we got some, or
It's
I-
not
I
public
can't-
yet. You mean the actual season, what the season will look like?
Yes, can you name
Not yet.
an event?
Not yet, soon.
When?
Did I tempt you? Soon. I don't know exactly when, but I think by later in the spring semester we'll have a public announcement about the program for it.
And it's definitely opening when?
So here, a few words on the opening. It's opening. We get the keys, so to speak, in March, and we then get to tune it, work with it until September. So it's a lot of
September.
playing that has to happen until it's ready for the public. Then in October it's dedicated and it starts opening to the public. It opens to the public, and then for a year and a semester. So that fall, spring, summer, and the next fall, that whole cycle will be a series of arts events campus-wide, including in the center, but not only. We're inviting the art departments, any STEM colleagues, anybody who wants to produce a work of art. We're going to try to celebrate the entire campus as an art venue, including the Lindemann, for a year plus. So that's the structure of the opening. It's not just a day or an event, it's a whole series of events.